You've seen him and you've heard him, so and you may not even know that that's the case, but just video. Go home and open up YouTube, put his name in, and just get blown away. But I'm going to ask him some questions. This is really about his life in the blues, and then as we progress through, I'd love to also field questions from you and send them up to him. But that's what these folks said. And my first question for you, Jerry, is, and I love this question because it's so specific. When was the moment that you actually knew that this harmonica, this instrument, was going to be your life?
Well, I did have an epiphany. Without going back to my background on Maxwell Street, at least at the moment, I can do that, but I didn't recognize that. I grew up around the blues because I was born in Chicago, and the projection, the great migration of black folk from the South to the North when they introduced the mechanical cotton picker and all that sort of stuff, and then worked during the war. So the first stop was Memphis, and then most of them went to Chicago, some went further to Milwaukee and Detroit. Real blues, the Mississippi stuff, New York was always a jazz town, but Chicago was really the blues town. And a lot of people would go to an area of Chicago that was called Maxwell Street, and they would set up and play outside. And my father had a store down there, so I was down there all the time when I was a little kid in the late 40s. And so I think of the blues as the incidental soundtrack to my childhood, but it was just part of the environment. I didn't pay it any great attention. I mean, Little Walter, the great blues harmonica icon, used to play a half a block from my father's store, but I didn't, recognize it as such, but I heard the music. And then his place was bought out for under eminent domain because the city was going to build a Dan Ryan highway through there. So about 20 years went by where I didn't really hear the blues, and then there was a small blues revival, and I heard it again, and I really went crazy for it. But I was at a friend's house, and he had a harmonica sitting on his mantelpiece, and I had tried I always liked music, and I had tried other instruments, guitar, and oh geez, when I was a little kid, they had these traveling people. This guy was selling accordion lessons house to house. So they signed me up for this. Meanwhile, I was a real little shrimp, and I got this huge accordion. I tried all kinds of things, most of which required digital dexterity. But being a very oral person, having to talk or, shove food in my face or kiss my girlfriend or smoke a cigarette, it was oral. And I pulled a harmonica off the shelf, and I went like this, and there was no digital dexterity. Well, the low notes here, the high notes here, breathe in, breathe out. I can do this, And I just had an affinity for it, and I felt it immediately. So I was on my way to hitchhike around Europe, and my friend said, "I'll take it with you, So I did, and I was playing like folk songs, Shenandoah or whatever, but I got up to Sweden, and I was staying with this friend that I had met in Spain, and I went to a record store, and I bought an album by Rice Miller, the guy they call Sonny Boy #2. And I went back to the house, and I dropped some acid, and I listened to that record, and I said, that is the coolest shit I ever heard. I gotta learn how to do that right. And from that moment, that was my total focus. And 5 years later, I was touring the world in the Muddy Waters Blues Band.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we met down in the Cape last summer and had a conversation. So I'm pulling some of that out. But didn't you have a conversation with Sonny Boy too, and he gave you a harmonica? Am I wrong about that?
Yes.
Okay.
No, my kind of my personal mentor in a certain sense, the guy was closest to was Big Walter Horton.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, I used to go down to his house. He lived in a rough part of town. He was living in a rooming house or something at the time. Terrible when you think about some of the great artists that have had such rough lives and never got rewarded. You know, they're legends now, but in their own lifetimes, you know, life was tough. He lived in some rundown rooming house around 35th Street in Chicago, and it was a few blocks from the stop on the L train. So I took the L train down there, and I had to navigate through a rough neighborhood, and I had a overcoat, and I'd pick up a pint of VO, and it had a long neck on it, and I'd have it in my overcoat pocket and walk down the street like, you know, yeah, come and get it, you know. So, you know, I guess it kept me safe. I'm here to tell the tale, but I'd get over to Walter's house and we'd open a bottle, and then I'd implore him to play for me or ask him something. And to this day, it's the greatest sound I ever heard come out of that harp. He was a great guy.
Since you mentioned Muddy Waters, what memories of playing with him, but beginning with how did the call come? I mean, I can only imagine what it must be like to get that phone call, but how did the call come?
Oh, you know, certain things in your life are just so implanted. I can summon up everything about the whole experience of getting called to join Muddy's band. I was playing around Chicago and around the Midwest with a great guitarist and mandolin player named Johnny Young, Big Johnny Young. And I played with him for a couple of years, and then I played with some other people, Johnny Littlejohn, a great slide guitar player, and Sam Lay, who was Howlin' Wolf's drummer and also the drummer in the first Paul Butterfield blues band. So I hadn't played with Johnny in a bit, but he passed away, and there was going to be a benefit at a club called On Broadway, which was, oddly enough, on Broadway. And at the time, I was working a straight job at Cook County Jail, of all places, and I knew the benefit was going to be that evening, so I stuck a couple harps in my pocket, because I figured I'd stop in there and maybe play. I knew all the players around town, and you know, they knew me, so So after work, I took the L train up there, and I walked into the club, and they had double doors, and I opened the door, and there was just a sea of people. I mean, it was really crowded, and I thought, I don't know if I want to stick around and work my way through all this mess. So I was considering just turning around, but I looked toward the stage, and I saw Muddy sitting at a table, a couple of guys in his band, and I knew them all already. I had sat in with Muddy before. He was really a gracious guy. If I was in a club, even if I wasn't playing, he'd say, "We got a terrific harmonica player up there. Jerry, stand up and take a bow." You know, very gracious. But at any rate, I look across the room and I see Muddy, and he locks eyes with me. There was no doubt about it. And he goes like this. Well, that's like a royal summons, you know, from the king. So I elbowed my way through the crowd, and I looked around, and I saw most of the other guys in his band. I didn't see Mojo Buford, who was playing harmonica for him at the time. And I make my way to Muddy's table, and he says, "You want to play my set with me?" And I said, "Yeah, man." So we went up there, and like I said, I sat in with him a couple other times, and I had always come off the bandstand thinking I didn't really play up to my ability. I was nervous, my mouth was drying out, all that kind of stuff. But at any rate, I got up there and played with him, and acquitted myself pretty well. And I knew Muddy wouldn't stick around, and I wasn't going to stick around, so I said, you know, "Thanks for letting me play," and so on and so forth. And I went to outside their front door, and it was raining a little bit, and there was a little canopy, so I'm standing there, and I knew Muddy would be coming out again, and I wanted to really thank him again. So shortly afterward, he came out with his manager, and he asked me, he said, "Can you travel?" And I said, "Muddy, you just name any place on earth you want me to be, I'll be there." So he turned to his manager, he said, take this boy's number or whatever, you know. And so on my way home, you know, I'm fantasizing about it, but after a while I took the needle out of my arm and, you know, figured, all right. It was nice, and he was being gracious and made me feel good. So I went back to work the next couple of days. I think that was on a Tuesday night. I went to work at the jail Wednesday and Thursday and Friday. I come home Friday, and I had a little one-room apartment, and there was a wall phone next to the bedroom, and it rings about 7 o'clock at night, and I pick it up, "Hello." And the voice on the other end said, "Oh, hi, this is Scott Cameron, Muddy Waters' manager." Time stopped. I figured there's only one reason this guy is calling me, and I can't look it in the face. I can't. I just let it unfold. And he says, "Muddy wants you to call him. Do you have his number?" And actually, I did have it. Repeated to him, said, "Yeah, that's it. He's home right now. Give him a call. And when you're done, call me back." And he gave me his number. So I called Muddy, and he answers the phone, and I said, "Hey, Mud, this is Jerry, you know, the harmonica player." He said, "Yeah, well, we start May 25th in Indianapolis. The boys are playing down at Queen Bee's this weekend. You might want to go down there and play with them and get used to it," or something like that. I said, I'll certainly do that. I didn't know what to say. I mean, I was like totally stunned. I said, "Well, all right, I'll be down at Queen Bee's on the weekend. Thanks, Mud." And I hung up. And I still didn't go crazy. Then I called Scott back, and he said, I remember saying to him, well, you know, I got a straight job. There's no chance that it's falling through, is there? Because I got to quit my job and everything. He said, no, Muddy's word is good as gold. It's a done deal. And then he asked me, you know, my social security number, all the whatever little business details. And I hung up the phone and I just went crazy. I mean, I was just so full of energy, and I had a friend who had a record store further up on Sheridan Road, and I tore out of my apartment. I left the door, I just ripped the door open, tore out of my apartment, and just ran to his record store because I had to tell somebody and burn off that energy, and that's how I got the gig.
Oh, man, wow, what a story. And then are there, you know, I can't imagine 6 years on the road, but with Muddy Waters, but is there a memory or a story that pops?
Yeah, I was talking to my wife about this, and I don't know if I'll be successful. I actually have to hold my emotions in because it really is emotional for me, especially when I tell this story. But my first gig of all, I played at the White House Carnegie Hall. I played with Eric Clapton 55 times at the Royal Albert Hall, every major jazz festival. I mean, it seems like it happened to somebody else, but nothing. The greatest thing was the very first gig with Muddy, because it was May 25th, 1974, at a baseball stadium in Indianapolis in the middle of the day. It was a hot day, and when it was our turn, we walked out. It was a festival, there were other bands on there and whatever, but our turn came. We walked out on stage, and we're all standing in front of our amplifiers ready to go, and this disembodied voice from the PA announcer said, "Ladies and gentlemen," every time, "the Muddy Waters Blues Band." And when I heard that, it's like 10,000 volts of electricity went through me. I mean, to think that I was part of that. Because the thing about that gig was, the thing about the Muddy Waters Blues Band, now, B.B. King was a great blues icon as well, but I don't think anybody could name any player that played with B.B. as far as a named player. But Muddy was like Duke Ellington. Muddy turned out stars. People know Little Walter, Big Walter, Junior Wells, James Cotton, Jimmy Rogers, Otis Spann. Yeah, thank you. The great Otis Spann. So, and as Otis Spann said, the harmonica is the mother of the band. And it is. It's the lead instrument and the second voice. That was the greatest job in the world for a harmonica player, and he had all the great players. Little Walter, you know, like I said, Junior Wells, Big Walter Horton, Cotton, all these guys. So it was like being in the royal line of succession, you know. And as I say, you know, the Muddy Waters Blues Band was like the New York Yankees. I mean, Muddy was the Babe Ruth of blues singers. And now I'm playing center field. You know, I'm Joe DiMaggio, I'm Mickey Mantle. You know, I mean, so when I heard that the first time, ladies and gentlemen, the Muddy Waters Blues Band, and of course I kicked the whole set off with an instrumental. I went right into Off the Wall, which is a great little Walter instrumental. And that was really my single greatest thrill. Like I said, I played all these other great venues and fabulous shows. I played to 200,000 people live in Hyde Park with Eric Clapton, but that moment was never surpassed.
Yeah. When that moment happened, the moment you started to play, did it you just go right to the music and it went away, or were you angling with it the whole time?
Yeah, no. I mean, once you start, you can get butterflies or be nervous about this or that, but once you start rolling, you're focused on the music. So it was great.
That's great, thank you. And so,
great moment.
Moving forward a little bit, how about the formation of the legendary blues band, and how did that come about?
Well, unfortunately, that came about because certain things were going sour in the band, mostly because of his manager, who was, well, as my father used to say, the guy's so crooked they'll have to dig his grave with a corkscrew. And we were being unfortunately taken advantage of in certain ways. And, it's a long story. I mean, I can tell some of the details about double dipping and the way things were done behind our back. And, the band took a lot of weight for stuff it shouldn't have had to put up with. And what happened was we got left high and dry at Christmas. Must have been 1979. Muddy decided to take some time off. Well, that's okay, because you're making the lion's share of the money. You can take 45 days off, but for the band, just before Christmas, it was a disaster. We lived gig to gig and tried to scrape up enough money. We doubled up in hotel rooms, all that sort of stuff. So myself and this little guy that was traveling with us as a semi-road manager, we decided to try and put together a little tour for the band. And one of the vehicles that we used in the band, we had two vehicles on the road, one of which was a Chevy Suburban that Willie Big Eye Smith, the drummer, drove, and I was always in his van. And he garaged that at his house and used that as his personal vehicle. But it was Muddy's thing, and he asked Muddy, could he use it on this little tour that we had put together for ourselves? And Muddy said no. And Willie was furious. He was enraged about that. And I think rightly so. So Fuzz, Calvin Jones, the bass player, he had a big long Cadillac. So we rented a U-Haul, and we all scrunched up in the Cadillac. We had put together a little tour, and I think it was the first stop on the tour, oddly enough, was at the Red Creek in Rochester. True. Jeff Springett. I saw him the other night. Nice guy. That was the first gig on the tour, and we drove from, we meet up, well, we must have been in Chicago, yeah. So it was a long drive and, fairly uncomfortable and all this stuff, but we were used to long drives, and Willie was a fabulous driver. He was the only known holder of the Palm Tree to Palm Tree Award, Florida to California nonstop. He was a horse behind the wheel. And but at any rate, we came up to Rochester. We played to a packed house we played the packed houses everywhere we went on that little tour. And while we didn't command the kind of price that Muddy made, we were making enough that when we cut it up evenly, we made way more than we were getting paid by Muddy. So that gave us the confidence that we could make it on our own. Now, that's not something we wanted to do, but if push came to shove, which it eventually did, we knew we could make it. And after some hassles about our trip to Japan, we came back and there was stuff going on, and we pulled the trigger on it and decided that we would go out there as a legendary blues band. I wasn't particularly fond of the name. I thought it was a bit self-aggrandizing. However, it was Willie's idea, and then when I thought about, because they used to introduce it as Muddy Waters and his legendary blues band, so we figured, well, we're the legendary blues band. Okay, let's go with that, So I went along with it, and it seemed to work. And we did fine on our own, but the greatest thing, it was so gratifying to me. I loved Muddy, and I didn't, and we all did. I mean, we all respected him, and I loved him, and it hurt me, to leave, with his band, because I was the band leader, and I guess to a certain extent, they blamed me for stealing his band or something like that. It was not the intention, but we presented them with, I won't go into all the details, but at any rate, I wanted a rapprochement with Muddy. And after our first album came out, Life of Ease, which I produced and wrote a bunch of songs for, he heard about it. And of course, we were playing the same clubs, not at the same time, but we were, passing or whatever. He had put together a band at the end only for a year before he stopped playing for health reasons. And at any rate, our first album had come out, and I can't remember how it happened that he said he wanted to see me, or I can't remember how, but at any rate, I went out to, by this time he was no longer living on the south side, he was living in a suburb of Chicago called Westmont. And I went out to his house shortly after his birthday, and see, I didn't want to see him before I had proven something to him that we could make it, because I knew how much pride he took in turning out stars and turning out people that went on to have successful careers on their own, like James Cotton and some of these other people. He was very proud of that. And I knew that if we went out there and showed him that we had the goods to make it on our own and make recordings and tour and go overseas, that he would be walking around saying, I trained those boys, those are my boys, and he would take pride in it. So when I felt the time was right, I went out to see him, and he opened the door, and he threw his arms around me. And he sent one of his kids downstairs to get 2 bottles of champagne, which we cracked. And he said, I heard your record's a good record. I'm real proud of you. And it just made all the difference, because a few months later he was dead.
Wow, these are incredible stories. How did you then get connected to Eric Clapton, and are there stories to tell around that?
Well, interestingly enough, getting the gig with Muddy was the nexus. everything that happened in my life, from growing up around the blues on Maxwell Street, led up to getting the gig with Muddy. Now, that was really the turning point, because everything that has happened to me since has been a result of being in the Muddy Waters Blues Band. And certainly getting the gig with Eric Clapton was a function of that. He was a huge fan of Muddy's and a fan of Little Walters as well. And we were contacted to do a European tour with him in 1978, I think. Yeah, that's right, 78. So we toured Europe with him as his opening act, and he came out and saw us once, and he couldn't deal with it. You know, it would intimidate him to go out after that. But at any rate, we were his opening act, and frequently at the end of his show, he would call just Muddy and myself out to play an encore with him. So I got to know him a little bit, and then we did a 45-city tour of the U.S. the following year with Eric. And then I remember I was playing with my own band in Buffalo, New York. I don't remember if I was with Legendary or with my own band, but I remember Eric was in town. He was playing in Buffalo, and I called his office and got a couple tickets. And at any rate, he knew I was in audience. He called me right out of the audience to come up on stage and play with him. So in what year was it, babe? Oh, 1991. I actually got the call in 1990, right around Thanksgiving. Phone rang one night. We were in bed together, and it was Mike Kappas, who used to be John Hammond's agent. He's retired now. But he said that he had gotten a call from Roger Forrester, who was Eric's manager, and they were looking for me, and they couldn't track me down. You know, did he know how to get a hold of me, which he did. Anyways, he said, "This is Roger's number. Call him tomorrow. I think they want you to play with Eric at the Albert Hall next year," or something like that. And the next morning, you know, I called over to England. Anyway, we were dancing around the house. I mean, but oddly enough, and I didn't tell anybody for a while, and oddly enough, I remember we went to dinner at my wife's parents' house. And she has some brothers and sisters and all this kind of stuff. And I finally spilled the beans that we were gonna, in January, we were gonna go over to England to rehearse and play at the Royal Albert Hall with Eric Clapton. And her brother, who was a big music freak, real fanatic, he's got great taste in music, and he's, wow, oh man, that must be the greatest thrill. And I remember saying to him, yeah, I'm really happy about it, but nothing could surpass Muddy. Yeah, I mean, at the time, he was a nice guy, and he could play and all that kind of stuff, but he was just another big rock star to me, and he puts on his pants like everybody else.
Are there any musicians out there that you that you wish that you had the chance to play with, or still?
Just one.
Yeah, oh, good.
Because I was so fortunate. I mean, the list of, I played with the greatest players that ever lived. One guy that I really regret that I never got a chance to play with was Otis Spann. He lived in Muddy's basement. He was the greatest of all time, and I loved everything about Spann. And he used to train the guys that would come into Muddy's band. He'd take them down to the basement and train them, I mean, as far as what Muddy wanted to hear, where to get in and get out, and all this kind of stuff. I mean, I figured it out, and I knew Muddy's music, you know, pretty well. But I would have loved to have played with Otis.
I'd love to, I've got a couple more questions in here, but I'd love to start to open this up now to questions from out here. But let me, oh, you got one already. Let's start over here.
Yeah, I didn't mean to interrupt you there.
No, that's all right.
Two quick questions. First of all, I'm the guy that said Otis Spann. I saw him in Buffalo in '66. I mean, in Pittsburgh in '66 with Muddy. It was one of the most illuminating things I ever saw. But the question, two questions. One is, did your time with Eric ever coincide with one of Rochester's great favorite sons, Steve Gadd, who plays drums with him a lot?
Oh, yeah, I played with Steve Gadd. He's, you know, he's the man. He's a great drummer, and he's, you know, played with everybody in every genre. I mean, he's the drummer's drummer.
And then the other quick question is, I was wondering, as expert and talented as you are, and excluding yourself, because we know you're a very great harp player, what other harp players, maybe 4 or 5 harp players, should we all have in our collections?
Well, you should start with what I call the usual gang of suspects, which is the originators of the form, the people who actually developed the stylistic forms that people still follow today, and the language and vocabulary of blues harmonica, and that would be the first Sonny Boy Williamson as a starting point, because he's really the foundation of it all. That's John Lee Williamson. He started recording in the 30s. His first big hit was Good Morning Little Schoolgirl, and he got stabbed to death with an ice pick in 1947. But he's at the top of the list for me. But then there's what they call the second Sonny Boy, whose actual name was Rice Miller, and whose style bears no resemblance to the first, but an equally great artist in his own right. And my friend, the great Big Walter Horton, they called him the King of Tone, because the sound, his sound was so beautiful. He had a very fast, kind of shimmering vibrato that made his notes glow, and he was so percussive. Just a wonderful player. Not the musical genius that Little Walter was. Now, early Little Walter started with, as everybody did, with John Lee Williamson's style. And if you listen to early Little Walter, you'll hear it clear as day. But he wanted to play the current music of his day, and as a late teenager, it was jump bands at the end of the war, usually led by saxophone players. So he played a more linear saxophone swinging kind of style, and to this day he's considered the ultimate blues harmonica icon. Now there's some contemporary players that are fabulous, and some of them just really, you know, blow my mind. Because when I started, you could count the number of guys that could play credible blues harmonica on the fingers of one hand, and you didn't have to use all your fingers. Now they're all over. I mean, when I started touring with Muddy, our opening acts would be comedians, singers, whatever. It was rare to even have a blues band open up for us. Now there are blues bands everywhere. I mean, I go to the furthest reaches of the earth, you know, other cultures, and I mean, I was walking down the street in New Zealand here, and Little Red Rooster come out of some, you know, went to Japan, and there's, you know, they're singing Elmore James, and, you know, so it's ubiquitous now. But there's some terrific contemporary players. At the top of the list for me is Kim Wilson from the Fabulous Thunderbirds, who's a genius on that thing, and he's just, I mean, he's really a force of nature. He's a great player, and he really knows. Now, you know, he's a great harmonica player, but he knows how to play blues. I love Rick Estrin, who's my brother from another mother. He's got a band called Little Charlie and the Nightcats that tours all over, and he's a terrific harmonica player, great entertainer. Oh yeah, that's right. Little Charlie retired. Now it's Rick Estrin and the Nightcats. Thank you, sweetie. And a number of years ago, now this is a name I'm sure that's completely unknown to anybody, but I was playing a festival in Spain, and the promoter brought up some local harmonica players to meet me and all this kind of, and this one kid stood out. I mean, I just recognized him. This kid has got a gift from God. His name is Victor Puertas, and he performs in a lot of different settings now, but he has a duo with his brother. His brother plays guitar, and he plays harp in the duo. He's also a great piano player. He's a musical genius. He's got you know, like, I wrote some liner notes for him on his piano album, because I didn't even know he played piano, but on the harmonica, I never heard anything like. He can play stylistically everything like Sonny Terry, and he can do all that, you know, chordal stuff, and then he can just blow saxophone players away with that little 10-hole thing. But I remember writing liner notes for him in which I said, what Victor brings to the table can't be taught, learned, or practiced. As the great basketball coach John Wooden said, you can't teach height. And you can't teach what this kid has. No, but, I mean, he's an unknown name, but wow, what a player. But Kim Wilson, my own favorites are Kim and Victor and Rick Estrin I love. And I mean, there are guys like Rod Piazza and, they're just, Paul Lamb from England, who is a very good player. Little Annie Raines, you know, Dennis Grunling. And over the years, I've been able to, you know, I don't take credit for anybody's playing. You know, they do it on their own. But I've given tips to a lot of the people that are out there now.
Another question? All right, I got one for you then. Tell me a little bit about the CD Down in the Mood Room and the shift and how you respond differently to it than the other CDs that you have and the other music you have.
Well, the harmonica is a completely unique instrument. A lot of instrumentalists will say, well, you want to sound like a human voice. The harp can, as I say, you know, sing, cry, wail, scream, bark, moan. You can infuse it with a lot of human qualities. And it's surprising what you can do with this, with just the small diatonic harp. And there were a few things that I could do, and some music that I enjoyed and always wanted to play or record that I couldn't do with a straight blues band, because a straight blues band necessarily wouldn't be able to do the accompaniment correctly. But my great friend, the great Duke Grobelard, I don't know how many of you are familiar with him, but you know, I play with everybody from Lightnin' Hopkins to Duke and all the modern players and the great players in history, Jimmy Rogers, whatever. Duke's at the top of my list. The guy's, he's just the most wonderful musician, and he can play anything, and he's a fabulous arranger and accompanist, and he has ideas, and I never go into a studio on my own volition without tapping into Duke's talents. At any rate, I'd been out of the business for a while, or I had taken a hiatus. Anyway, I wanted to kind of get back into it, and I wanted to make a different kind of record that would incorporate some of this other music. So I went down to Duke's place, and he had just built a studio in his basement called the Mood Room. And I told him what I wanted to do, and showed him some of the material that I wanted to play, and he said, let's do it. And so my album, Down in the Mood Room, which I have over here, she's holding up, that was the first full-length CD that he recorded in his studio. And obviously there's blues on there, but also some jazz influenced stuff. The CD starts with a tune called Doodlin', which is a very famous Horace Silver tune that he recorded in 1952 with the Jazz Messengers. And also some standards. I play Stormy Weather on it, Canadian Sunset. I play an old jug band tune. So stylistically, it's all American music, and it covers a wide spectrum of styles. And I'm very proud of it. I mean, I can hold that up, and you know, it's one of my standard lines is, I just can run a cheese grater up and down my arm as listen to myself play. And even I like it. So that's the best recommendation I can give to you.
All right, one last question, and I'll let everybody go. What's it like to play on Sesame Street with the Muppets?
Well, unfortunately, it wasn't a live performance, so I didn't get to meet the Muppets or Jim Henson or anybody. It was a studio thing. I was up in Canada, and been introduced to the producer of the Canadian edition. I think they used it across the board afterwards, but there was a separate Canadian producer, and he asked me about writing a song. It's actually the first song I wrote, and realized I had a certain gift for it. And he was talking about the visual of a guy and a I don't know, like a kite or flying above the crowd and all this kind of stuff. And I'd never written a song, and I didn't have a methodology but I remember taking out a pad and writing just words at random that would, sky and fly, clouds, heaven, just any word associated with the visual that he presented me. And I put together a clever little song for him, but he wanted me to play. And so they had something about the letter Z, and they call it Z up there. And so he said, just, you know, rent a little studio time where you are. I was living in Watertown, Massachusetts at the time, and my daughter was like 5 years old. So I went in the studio, and I forget the little jingle or how we said Z or Z. It was like Z, Z. But I had my 5-year-old and a bunch of her friends all around the mic, and they all had little headphones on their tiny little heads, or at least maybe one of them did. But, you know, little kids crowded around a couple of mics, and I cued them, and they all said, Z, Z. And then I had some harmonica accompaniment to it, and that was my contribution to Sesame Street. And I gotta say, not that it was big money or anything like that, but nonetheless, God, well, my daughter's gonna be 38, so it was a long time ago. I still get royalties. Royalties are the greatest thing ever invented. See, you go around to a club, you know, you drive 500 miles, you beat the shit, you schlep your equipment in and set it up and run back to the hotel, eat some bad food if you got time, you shower, put on your better clothes, come back, play the show finishes, drag the stuff out there, load it in the van, head off to the next town. Whatever little money you make for that gig, that's all the money you're ever gonna see. You write a song, maybe it's used here or used there, what money, it's the gift that keeps on giving. Oh man, I was big in Spain for some reason, God only knows why, but I must have sold a lot of records over there. I went to my mailbox one time, I pulled out a check for $15,000 and I went, what? I mean, usually it's chump change, you know, a $175 check or something like that. It was like ridiculous. I called the people that administer the publishing to make sure, because I didn't want to start spending this and then say, oh, big mistake, you owe us $15,000, you know. I called to make sure it was kosher, you know. So I still get, you know, I mean, the checks are minuscule now, but once in a while, something that says Sesame Street, you know, $3.47.
Thank you for letting us share a little bit of your life in the blues.